The alarm started as a low hum in every civilized world in the Andromeda sector. Within hours, it turned into full-blown panic. The Galactic Trade Network, an old system that had linked thousands of worlds for more than 50,000 years, was falling apart. Administrator Veldar of the KRYNN Empire watched the holographic displays on the Central Exchange Station's crystalline observation deck with growing horror. Red markers spread across the star map like a disease. One by one, trade routes that had worked perfectly for thousands of years were shutting down. How is this possible? Veldar's 4 eyes blinked quickly one after the other, which is a sign of great distress for his kind. His main analyst, a spider-like creature named Kix, used her delicate appendages to change the data streams. Administrator, the Xerium deposits are gone, Kix said, her voice shaking. Every big mining world says the same thing. The main thing that powers our faster-than-light drives is gone. Xerium. The element of miracles. It had been plentiful for thousands of years, powering the engines that held the galaxy together. Geological surveys now confirmed what no one thought possible: the deposits that were easy to get to were gone. What was left was buried so deep in the cores of planets that it would take hundreds of years to get it out with current technology. Ships wouldn't be able to travel between star systems quickly without Xerium. Trade came to a halt when travel stopped. Without trade, the complicated galactic economy started to fall apart like a thread pulled from old cloth. As soon as Veldar got in touch with the Council of Galactic Civilizations, they did. Holograms of representatives from hundreds of species appeared in the Grand Chamber. There were the tall Xantharians, the gaseous Vrel, the silicon-based Cortex, and many more. Each civilization had been doing well for a long time, their technologies had been improved to the point of perfection, and their societies were stable and predictable. High Chancellor Drevik of Xanthara said, "We must put conservation protocols into place," and his voice echoed. "Stop traveling right away by 90%. That will only put off the inevitable," said Matriarch Sella of the Vrel Collective. "We need to look for other ways to get power." But this was the problem that would cause the crisis. These civilizations had become too successful and too comfortable. Over thousands of years, they had turned their scientific methods into strict systems. Their researchers followed rules that had worked for many generations. The stability that had made them rich now turned into a cage. For 3 months, the smartest people in the galaxy came together. They kept coming up with new ideas, but they all followed the same pattern: small changes to existing technology, small changes to proven systems, and careful improvements to old methods. It wasn't enough. The great stagnation had begun. Spaceports that used to be busy with interstellar trade were now quiet. Economies that had traded strange goods across light years were now having trouble getting the basics. Worlds that had been importing food for generations saw their supplies run low. Medical shipments couldn't get to colonies that were far away. The very fabric of civilization in the galaxy started to fall apart. And in the dark of this crisis, on a small blue planet circling an unremarkable yellow star, people watched the chaos unfold with growing worry and a hint of dangerous opportunity. It was only 73 years ago that Earth joined the galactic community. A KRYNN survey ship found our radio signals. The ancient civilizations of the stars thought we were kids, clumsy, violent, and very basic. Our first meeting had been a mess. We almost started 3 wars because we didn't understand each other. Our translators couldn't handle basic galactic common for the first 5 years, and most species thought we weren't even fit for space travel because our technology was so far behind. The people? When Veldar's junior assistant first suggested talking to Earth during the early days of the crisis, he had laughed. The ones that still use chemical rockets? The species that almost destroyed their own planet before they even learned how to use fusion power? But Ambassador Sarah Chen, who was the Galactic Council's representative for all of humanity, saw the crisis in a different way than the other ancient species did. They thought there was an impossible shortage, but she saw a pattern she knew. Sarah grew up in the Detroit reclamation zones, where her grandmother's generation turned abandoned factories and other industrial areas into thriving communities using only salvaged materials and a lot of stubborn creativity. She had gotten her PhD by studying how post-scarcity thinking almost ruined the economy of Earth before the resource wars forced people to relearn how to live with less. She knew something that the powerful people in the galaxy had forgotten: need leads to new ideas. Request denied, was the cold response when Sarah first suggested that scientists from other countries join the research project. This crisis calls for the most skilled people. Sorry, Ambassador, but your species doesn't have the theoretical basis to make a real contribution. Sarah wasn't shocked. For 7 decades, she had watched aliens treat humans like excited but stupid cousins. Our ships were slower, our computers weren't as advanced, and our knowledge of physics was laughably incomplete by galactic standards. They didn't get that these weren't weaknesses, they were strengths that had been forged in the fire of scarcity. On Earth, the news of the galactic crisis caused a different kind of reaction. The Global Innovation Council met in Geneva and brought together the smartest people on the planet, including engineers, scientists, artists, hackers, street mechanics, and even a few reformed criminals whose creative problem-solving had gotten them into trouble in the past. Dr. James Rodriguez, a Mexican physicist who had become famous for making fusion reactors out of old space debris, stood in front of the group with barely contained excitement. "Look at what they're trying," he said, showing the Galactic Council's ideas for solving the problem on the main screen. "Every single approach assumes they need to find more Xerium or develop a completely new element with identical properties. They're stuck because they've been so successful." Yuki Tanaka, a Japanese engineer known for her work turning ocean plastic into building materials, asked, "And that's our advantage?" "Exactly," James said with a smile. "They've never had to really make things up. Their cultures have been around for tens of thousands of years. They've made everything as good as it can be. But optimization isn't new, it's just making things better. They're trying to improve a solution that doesn't exist." The human team started working in secret because they knew that any official proposal would be turned down. They didn't use the advanced theories of galactic science to solve the problem. Instead, they used the oldest survival skill known to man, the ability to see treasure in trash. Sarah kept going to the Galactic Council meetings, where she quietly watched the growing sense of hopelessness. Now, ships were being grounded for good. Whole industries were in danger of going under. The Cortex had started talking about strategic withdrawal, which meant giving up their outer colonies to focus their resources. At the 147th emergency session, Matriarch Sella said, "We're running out of time. If we don't find a way to fix this in 6 months, the economy will completely fall apart. Many beings on many worlds will suffer." Sarah put her hand up. "The human delegation asks for permission to show a different way." The room went quiet. Then, to Sarah's surprise, it was Veldar who spoke. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Administrator Chen, at this point, we're so desperate that we'll listen to anything. Even from—" He stopped to think of the right words, "even from a species that is still growing." Sarah smiled. It wasn't respect yet. But being desperate would work. "Thanks, Administrator. I think my kind might have something useful to offer. Not because we're advanced, but exactly because we're not." Dr. Rodriguez's speech to the Galactic Council started with a confession that made a lot of alien species turn away in disgust. He said plainly, "We can't make new Xerium. We don't have the tools to make stable exotic matter. We probably won't for another 1,000 years." He stopped for a moment to let the disappointment sink in. "But we don't have to." The holographic display changed, and the scientists gasped, some in shock and others in what could only be called horror. Chief Scientist Vaughn of the Cortex said, "What you want to do is impossible." His crystal body pulsed with angry red light. "Are you saying that we should use trash as a way to move things? Waste that is dirty, uneven, or unstable?" James, who was not afraid, said, "Not just any waste. We've looked at the waste from your industrial processes on 70 different worlds. We see what you call waste as a resource that hasn't been used yet. In particular, we found that a mix of discarded fusion residue, failed Xerium extraction attempts, and even processed sewage can be turned into a sustainable propulsion matrix when it is properly refined and combined." There were protests in the chamber. "This is an abomination of the right way to do science. The energy output would not be the same every time. It goes against all the rules of clean engineering." Veldar held up one of his 4 hands to ask for quiet. "Dr. Rodriguez, what you're saying sounds more like magic than science. How can random trash power travel between stars?" James smiled. "Because we don't want to copy Xerium's properties exactly. We're making something new that works, but is messier and less elegant. We call it appropriate technology here on Earth. Not the best answer, but the best one we can really use with the resources we have." Yuki Tanaka took over the presentation and showed the test results from the prototype drives that humanity had built. "Yes, it doesn't always work. Yes, it needs to be changed all the time. Yes, by your engineering standards, it looks bad. But it does work. Using things you literally throw away, we've gotten 60% of Xerium-based drive efficiency. 60%. Matriarch Sella's gas-like form glowed with doubt. "That would make travel between stars only a little bit possible." "Yes, for your current routes," Sarah said. That brings us to the second part of our proposal, completely changing the way your trade network works. The next hologram showed the current trade routes in the galaxy. These were beautiful geometric patterns that connected major hub worlds in the best way possible. Then it changed to show the other option for humanity, a chaotic web of smaller jumps, irregular routes, and what looked like total chaos. Vaughn said, "This is crazy. You're suggesting we give up our well-planned hub-and-spoke system for chaos?" "For strength," Sarah said. "Your system worked perfectly when you had unlimited Xerium. Every route was set up to work as well as possible. But it was weak. The whole network went down when the main hubs lost power. There is no central point in our system. Yes, it's messy. But there are 10 other ways to get there if one doesn't work." The last part, which the team called the humanity hack, was brought up by Dr. Rodriguez. It was a collection of what could only be called creative vandalism, changes to technology that made alien engineers physically uncomfortable. "Do you want us to put magnetic confinement bottles made from old cargo containers on our ships?" Veldar's eyes blinked in shock. James shrugged and said, "They're already rated for high-pressure environments. Why build new when you can use what you already have?" "And this?" Vaughn pointed to another diagram. "You've turned life support systems into backup power sources." "Only during off-peak hours," Yuki said. "By catalyzing the extra oxygen production, you can get a 3% boost in engine efficiency. It's not much, but every little bit helps when you don't have a lot of money." The silence that came after was not the same as before. It wasn't rejection, it was the uncomfortable realization that these crude, inelegant solutions might actually work. "This is everything we were told not to do," Matriarch Sella finally said. "It's not efficient, it's not predictable, and it looks bad. But does it work?" Sarah asked plainly. The question stayed in the air. After months of elegant failures, the smartest people in the galaxy were now facing ugly success. Veldar said slowly, "There's one way to find out. We do a test. One ship, one route, and your way of doing things. If it works." He stopped talking because the implications were too big to put into words. Sarah nodded. "The Earth delegation gives us the perseverance for the trial run. We'll take medical supplies from Earth to the Outer Rim colonies, a trip that hasn't been possible for 3 months. You'll have proof that our method works if we succeed." "And what if you fail?" Vaughn wanted to know. "Then we'll fail at something new instead of failing at the same thing over and over," James said. "On Earth, we say that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is crazy. The galaxy has been trying the same smart solutions for months. Maybe it's time to do something crazy." The vote was much closer than anyone thought it would be. The council voted for the test flight by a small margin after hours of discussion. They didn't think it would work, but they didn't have any other options. Veldar went up to Sarah privately as she was leaving the council chambers. "Ambassador Chen, I hope you know what you're putting at risk. If this doesn't work, it will be more than just embarrassing for your species. It could make other worlds lose the little hope they have left." Sarah looked him in the eye steadily. "Administrator, humanity has always been the underdog. We've made it through ice ages, plagues, wars, and our own worst instincts. A long time ago, we learned that hope isn't something you wait for, it's something you make from what you have. We're going to make this work." The Perseverance sat in Earth's orbital dock, looking decidedly unimpressive next to the sleek alien vessels that occasionally passed by. She was a human-built cargo hauler, originally designed for runs between Earth and Mars, now retrofitted with humanity's cobbled-together faster-than-light drive. Captain Maria Santos ran her hand along the ship's hull plating, literally repurposed shipping containers welded into place. "She's not pretty," Maria said to her crew, "but she's ours." The crew was deliberately diverse, not just in ethnicity, but in expertise. Alongside trained astronauts were a Detroit auto mechanic named Jake who'd learned to keep ancient combustion engines running with rubber bands and prayer, a Kenyan agricultural engineer named Amora who specialized in closed-loop systems, and Dr. Hiro Matsuda, a physicist who'd been kicked out of 3 universities for dangerously unorthodox experiments. The cargo hold contained 20 tons of medical supplies desperately needed by the Outer Rim colonies, worlds that hadn't received shipments in 4 months. Children were dying of treatable diseases. The pressure was immense. "Galactic news feeds are calling this the junk ship," Jake reported, scrolling through his tablet. "There's a betting pool on how far we'll get before exploding. The odds aren't great." "Let them bet," Maria replied. "We're not here to look good. We're here to prove something works." The departure was broadcast across the galaxy. Billions of beings watched, some curious, many skeptical, a few actually hoping these strange humans might succeed. Veldar observed from the Central Exchange Station, surrounded by scientists and analysts. All systems show nominal readings, an analyst reported. Though I've never seen nominal look quite so chaotic. The Perseverance engaged her drive. The modified waste fuel propulsion system hummed to life, its energy signature wildly irregular compared to the smooth curves of Xerium-powered ships. To trained galactic engineers, it looked like the ship was about to shake itself apart. Jump in 3, 2, 1. Reality folded. Inside the ship, the crew experienced the familiar stomach-churning sensation of faster-than-light travel, but with an added vibration that made their teeth chatter. Warning lights flickered across the engineering console, not failures, but indicators that the system was constantly adjusting, rebalancing, compensating for the irregular fuel burn. This is normal, right? Amora asked nervously, watching the gauges swing wildly. For us? Yeah, Hiro replied, making minute adjustments to the fuel mixture. We're not optimized. We're improvised. That means constant tweaking. What the galactic observers didn't understand was that this was actually humanity's advantage. Their ships were automated, perfect, requiring minimal intervention. The Perseverance needed human hands constantly adjusting, compensating, creatively solving micro-problems as they emerged. It was exhausting, inefficient, and it worked. The first jump completed successfully, though the Perseverance emerged 15% off her intended coordinates. Not bad, Maria muttered, consulting Jake's hand-drawn navigation charts, literal paper charts, because the computer navigation system kept trying to correct their deliberately chaotic route. That's the beauty of our system, Jake explained to the confused galactic observers later. We're not trying to hit exact coordinates. We're aiming for general regions, then adjusting. Like driving on back roads instead of highways. Takes longer, but you can always find a way through. Jump 2 brought their first real crisis. The fuel mixture destabilized, causing power fluctuations throughout the ship. Alarm screamed. Across the galaxy, viewers watched in grim satisfaction. The human experiment was failing, just as predicted. But inside the Perseverance, the crew was already moving. Hiro killed the main feed, switching to backup systems that he'd cobbled together from 3 different incompatible technologies. Amora rerouted life support to provide temporary power. Jake, using nothing but visual inspection and 40 years of mechanical intuition, identified a clogged fuel injector and cleared it with a wire coat hanger. Did he just fix a faster-than-light drive with a coat hanger? An alien engineer asked in disbelief. If it's stupid but it works, it ain't stupid. Jake's voice came through the comm channel, echoing an old human military saying. The ship jumped again. And again. Each time requiring adjustments, workarounds, creative solutions to emerging problems. The crew barely slept, constantly monitoring, tweaking, improvising. It was exhausting work that would have broken the crew of any automated alien vessel. But humans had evolved working with imperfect systems. Our entire civilization had been built on making things work despite limitations. 5 days into the journey, twice as long as a Xerium-powered ship would have taken, the Perseverance entered outer rim space. The colony's orbital station detected her approach with astonishment. Perseverance, this is Outpost 7. We didn't think anyone could make it through. Outpost 7, this is Captain Santos. We've got 20 tons of medical supplies and proof that the galaxy doesn't need perfect solutions, just solutions that work. The docking was rough. Maria bounced the ship off the station's docking ring twice before getting it aligned, something that would have embarrassed a galactic pilot but made the Outpost 7 dock workers laugh with relief. Your ship sounds like it's held together with duct tape, the station commander said as the cargo was unloaded. Close? Maria grinned. We're actually using the alien equivalent of duct tape in at least 7 critical systems. The news spread like wildfire. Humanity's junk ship had successfully completed a route that had been impossible for 4 months. The supplies would save thousands of lives. But more importantly, the Perseverance had proved that humanity's chaotic, inelegant approach actually worked in the real world. As Maria prepared for the return journey, she received a transmission from Veldar himself. Captain Santos, I owe your species an apology. We dismissed your methods as primitive. But what you've accomplished is forcing us to reconsider what innovation really means. No apology necessary, Administrator, Maria replied. You gave us a chance when you were desperate. Now let's show the galaxy what happens when you give humanity a chance when you're not. The return journey was broadcast with even higher viewership. This time, the crew demonstrated their techniques, teaching alien engineers how to identify usable materials in waste streams, how to balance irregular power systems, how to think creatively when perfect solutions aren't available. By the time the Perseverance returned to Earth orbit, 3 other species had already begun testing humanity's methods. The innovation avalanche was beginning. 3 months after the Perseverance's successful mission, the Galactic Trade Network was a mess and looked very different. The beautiful, optimized routes that connected major hubs were gone. Instead, there was a messy web of smaller ships following crooked paths, powered by hybrid drives that made traditional engineers cringe. Ships no longer left on set schedules. Instead, they left when their cargo was ready and they had enough fuel, which made for a constant flow instead of scheduled waves. And it worked perfectly. 6 months ago, Veldar would have had a nervous breakdown if he had seen the display on the observation deck of the Central Exchange Station. Ships crossed paths in ways that didn't make sense, energy signatures changed a lot, and half of the ships were sending out what his computer called critical system warnings that the crews were ignoring. The efficiency rating has dropped to 71% of our previous optimized system, his analyst Kix said. And how much trade? Veldar wanted to know. 340% higher than the lowest point during the crisis. We're now working at 95% of what we were before the crisis and going up. The 4 eyes of Veldar blinked slowly. So we're less productive but more useful. Exactly, Administrator. The people showed us the difference. The change happened faster than anyone thought it would, thanks to a mix of desperation and what people called viral success. After the Perseverance proved the idea, other species started to try it out, first carefully and then with more confidence. The Cortex were some of the first to convert. They were silicon-based beings who had been perfecting crystalline engineering for over 80,000 years. Chief Scientist Vaughn, the same person who had called humanity's methods an abomination, stood in front of the Galactic Council with what could only be called embarrassed enthusiasm. Vaughn said, "We've put in place rules for recycling human waste across our fleet. Our engineers were initially against it. But the results are clear. Using things we used to throw away, we've gotten 73% more fuel efficiency. More importantly, we've learned that making our systems more flexible instead of perfect makes them less likely to break down when something goes wrong. What made you change your mind?" Matriarch Sella wanted to know. Vaughn's crystal structure flickered, which is the Cortex way of saying I'm sorry. One of our ships had a terrible failure in deep space. The crew should have died by every measure. But they knew how to improvise like people do. They used cargo netting, food containers, and what your species calls spit and determination to rebuild their life support system. It was scary to watch. It was also the most beautiful piece of engineering I've ever seen. Stories like this came from all over the galaxy. A Vrel transport got away from pirates by using a trick called playing possum, which means shutting down all systems to look dead and then restarting them with a battery made from passenger personal devices. A Xantharian medical ship saved 30 very sick people by turning their entertainment system into extra life support. The original designers would have thought this was impossible. But the real change was in how people thought. Galactic civilizations had been trying to reach perfection for tens of thousands of years. They had improved, optimized, and gotten rid of any problems with their systems until they were perfect and fragile. It was a big deal when people started doing good enough engineering. Dr. Rodriguez became a bit of a celebrity as he traveled between worlds to teach what humans called MacGyver engineering, after an old TV character from Earth who was known for solving problems with whatever materials he had on hand. There were a lot of alien engineers at his workshops who wanted to forget what they had learned. James told Sarah on one of their regular calls, "The hardest part isn't teaching new techniques. Getting them to understand that perfect can be the enemy of useful is hard." When I asked a Xantharian student to purposely build a bad system, she almost cried. "It felt like vandalism," she said. "But she really did it?" Sarah asked. "Finally." She called it an existential engineering crisis when her bad design did better than 3 perfect ones in a stress test. She's my best student now. The effect on the economy was huge. Worlds that had been cut off from each other for months were able to trade with each other again. Planets that didn't have a lot of resources found that they could make things of value out of things that rich worlds threw away. Adaptive technology is a new market for systems that can be changed, fixed, and used for other things instead of being thrown away. Of course, people became the most important part of this new economy. Alien ships filled Earth's orbit, looking for human-made hybrid drives, waste conversion systems, and modular parts. As consultants teaching species that had forgotten how to improvise, human engineers made a lot of money. We've gone from being new to the galaxy to being economic leaders in less than a year, Sarah told the UN General Assembly. Our GDP from trade with other galaxies has gone up by 2,000%. We are being offered technology transfers that would have taken us hundreds of years to develop on our own. Species that wouldn't answer our calls a year ago are now asking for formal partnerships. But Sarah wasn't happy. We need to be careful. Success can be just as risky as failure. We need to remember what made our solutions work. It wasn't better technology or more knowledge. We were willing to work with what we had, accept mistakes, and keep trying when simple solutions didn't work. Her warning turned out to be right. Some human companies started selling premium solutions that were just alien technology that had been repackaged with human branding. A few human engineers stopped teaching human improvisation and started teaching alien optimization techniques instead, thinking they were helping the species advance. Captain Maria Santos was the one who called them out at the first Galactic Innovation Summit on Earth. "We're not better than the species that have been traveling the stars for thousands of years," she said plainly. "We were just lucky that our specific weaknesses turned out to be strengths in this crisis. As soon as we forget that and act like we know everything, we become as rigid as the systems that failed." Maria's speech struck a chord. It reminded the galaxy and people that innovation isn't about putting in place new rigid systems to replace old ones. It was important to stay flexible so that you could keep changing, learning, and coming up with new ideas. The Galactic Council made this plan official by creating the Department of Adaptive Systems, with Sarah Chen as its first director and Maria Santos as the head of field operations. Their job was simple but revolutionary: keep chaos as a feature, not a bug. Make sure that the galactic economy never got so good that it couldn't handle the next crisis. "We're making improvisation a part of our institutions," Veldar said during the department's opening. "Which seems strange." "Welcome to the human way," Sarah said with a smile. "We're full of contradictions. We make plans for emergencies, but we know that plans don't always work. We make systems that are meant to break and be fixed. We focus on being flexible instead of being efficient. It sounds like it doesn't make sense, but it works," Veldar said in the end. "I'm starting to see why your kind survived and thrived even though they had a lot of problems. Because of your problems, you learned how to do well." As the ceremony came to an end and delegates from hundreds of worlds mingled, sharing stories of how they had come up with creative solutions and celebrating what humans had done, Sarah saw something that made her smile. In one corner, a Cortex engineer was showing a group of people how crystalline computing works. In another, a human mechanic was teaching a Xantharian how to use spare parts to hotwire a fusion reactor. The exchange was no longer one way. We were teaching the ancient civilizations, but we were also learning from them. The galaxy was changing into something new, not led by people but inspired by them. A place where resilience was more important than perfection, where chaos was seen as a source of strength, and where every species' unique point of view was valued not in spite of its differences but because of them. The great stagnation was over. The time of flexible innovation had begun. It all started when people looked at the trash in a galaxy and saw treasure. 18 months after the galactic crisis started, Ambassador Sarah Chen got an unexpected visitor at her office at the Department of Adaptive Systems. The hologram showed her a being she had never seen before. It was a representative of the ancients, a species so old and advanced that they didn't often talk to younger civilizations. The hologram said, "I am Keeper Thane." The being looked a little like a person, but it seemed to change between states of matter. "We have been watching your kind's involvement in the galactic crisis with interest. We want to know how you did what we couldn't." Sarah felt cold. The ancients had been traveling through space for more than 3 million years. They had given technology and knowledge to many younger civilizations. If they were asking people for help, "I'm honored, Keeper Thane, but I'm not sure what we can teach a species as advanced as yours." "That's exactly what we need to know," Thane said. "We have technology that you can't even imagine. We can change space-time, turn energy into matter, and make people's lives last for millions of years. But we couldn't figure out how to fix a simple lack of resources." "Why?" Sarah took her time before answering. "Can I ask you something? When was the last time your civilization really had a crisis? A problem that you couldn't solve with what you already knew?" The break lasted a long time. "By your calendar, 2.3 million years ago. We lived in a time that some people might call post-scarcity. Every problem since then has been manageable." "That's your answer," Sarah said softly. "You got too good at everything. You forgot how to fail, which means you forgot how to learn from your mistakes. People always fail. We've been doing it for a long time. We are very good at getting back up and trying something new. Thane's shape shone with what could have been anger or amusement. Are you saying that being primitive is a good thing? Not primitive, but inexperienced. There is a difference. We haven't had time to make our methods perfect, so we're still okay with them being imperfect. We haven't put ourselves in a corner by optimizing. The talk with the ancients changed everything. If even the most advanced species in the galaxy knew they'd become fragile from too much optimization, it proved everything that people had been teaching. But the effects went far beyond just engineering and economics. The philosophical ramifications of embracing productive chaos commenced an unforeseen transformation of galactic society. Young students on Zenthra started to question the strict school system that had made the same engineers for thousands of years. Constructive deviation was a movement that told students to come up with new ways to solve old problems instead of memorizing the right answers. Kira, a young Zentharian studying at the New Earth Zenthra exchange program, said, "My parents think I'm crazy. I told them I wanted to study applied improvisation, and they almost kicked me out of the house. But I know what your kind can do. I want to learn how to think that way, how to see opportunities instead of problems." The Vrel Collective, which was made up of beings who were naturally inclined to agree and fit in because they were made of gas, started to play around with what they called deliberate discord. They started taking into account dissenting opinions when making decisions, even when those opinions seemed obviously wrong, just to make sure they were looking at things from different angles. "It's not comfortable," Matriarch Sela told Sarah when she visited Earth. "Our whole species has changed over time to find harmony and bring our separate clouds together into one thought. Keeping up a disagreement on purpose feels wrong. But we've seen something amazing. Since we started keeping disagreements, our rate of innovation has gone up by 400%. Even the Cortex, with their perfect crystals, started adding what they called fault lines, deliberate flaws in their structures that allowed for flexibility and repair instead of total failure." Chief Scientist Vaughn showed Sarah his newest project, a crystal lattice that he had grown with patterns that weren't straight. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, admiring how the light bent in strange ways through the flaws. "It's heresy," Vaughn said, but he was clearly proud. "Our ancestors spent millions of years making crystal growth better so that these kinds of flaws wouldn't happen. Now we're bringing them back on purpose. But look," he put pressure on the crystal, and instead of breaking, it bent. Not perfect, but strong. Like people. There were a lot of cultural exchange programs between Earth and other worlds. Aliens didn't just want to know how to build things like humans did. They also wanted to know about human art, culture, philosophy, and history. They wanted to know how a species could be so disorganized and still work, and how it could be so flawed and still do well. Dr. Rodriguez taught more than just engineering, he also taught history. He told a class of students from different species that the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and the industrial age weren't orderly processes. They were messy and chaotic times with a lot of failed experiments and wrong turns. But that chaos led to amazing new ideas because people were free to fail and try again. A KRYNN philosopher named Velnash wrote a book called The Wisdom of Incompletion that became a hit all over the galaxy. It said that the best thing people could give the galaxy wasn't technology but permission. Permission to be flawed, to fail, and to try new things without feeling bad about it. Velnash wrote, "Every species reaches a point where they think they've reached the height of civilization. They think that consistency is wisdom and stability is success. Humanity reminded us that civilization is not a place to go, but a process to keep going. The moment you think you've done something perfectly, it starts to go downhill." But not everyone was happy with the changes. A conservative movement grew among many species, saying that cult of mediocrity thinking was ruining old traditions. They talked about how improvised systems led to accidents, how planned imperfection made things less efficient, and how the new adaptive approach was just plain messy. "We had order," said Senator Krath of the Traditionalist Coalition during a heated meeting of the Galactic Council. "We had a stable situation. Yes, we were in a crisis, but it didn't last long. Are you now saying that we should always accept chaos? That we give up the knowledge of millions of years for the foolish tests of a species that has only been around for 1,000,000 years?" Sarah stood up to answer, but it was Admiral Maria Santos, who is now the head of the Galactic Emergency Response Fleet, who spoke. "Senator Krath, you are correct that we are young. We haven't been around for 1,000,000 years. But in the short time we've been here, we've made it through ice ages, asteroid impacts, plagues that killed half our population, world wars, and almost destroying our own planet with pollution. We're still here because we learned one important lesson. The species that live on aren't the strongest or smartest, they're the ones that can change. Maria got some old data. Senator, look at the history of your own species. Your people went through a similar crisis a million years ago. The sun on your home world was dying. Your ancestors figured it out by making travel faster than light in just 2 generations. Everyone agrees that it was a time of panic and chaos. Ships that were being tested blew up. Lost were whole colonies. But you lived because your ancestors were willing to try crazy things when there were no perfect answers. She stopped for a moment to let that sink in. You forgot that lesson at some point along the way. You got so successful that you stopped being desperate enough to try crazy things. We don't want you to stop being wise. We want you to remember the wisdom of your own desperate ancestors who saved your species by being willing to fail. The silence that followed was very deep. Kraft sat down slowly, and his face showed that he was thinking, not angry. Of course, the argument went on. Change always meets with resistance. But there was no denying the momentum. The galactic economy kept getting stronger, but not by going back to the old optimized systems. Instead, it embraced the new adaptive approach. New alliances were made, not just in politics and business, but also in culture and ideas. The innovation clusters came about, teams of people from different species working together to solve problems that had seemed impossible. A human artist worked with a Vrel composer and a Cortex geometrist to make art that none of them could have thought of on their own. A physicist from Zenthar teamed up with a human street mechanic and an ancient philosopher to come up with a new way of thinking about quantum mechanics that combined math with common sense. Not only are we changing how the galaxy works, Sarah said during her yearly speech to Earth. We're changing what it means to be a civilization in the galaxy. For millions of years, progress meant getting closer to perfection. Now we're saying that progress might mean getting stronger, more flexible, and having the wisdom to stay imperfect so you can keep learning. As she spoke, she looked out at her audience, who were humans who a few years ago would never have thought their species would matter on the galactic stage. We didn't save the galaxy because we're special. We saved it because we know how to deal with limits. But here's the real lesson: every kind of animal has had to deal with limits at some point. Every civilization has had problems that seemed impossible to solve, but they did find ways to do so. We just remembered those lessons more recently than most. Our job now is not to rule the galaxy. It's to remind the galaxy of things it already knows but has forgotten, that being imperfect isn't a sign of weakness, chaos isn't disorder, and changing things isn't giving in. They give people strength, new ideas, and the will to live. The applause was deafening, not just from the people in the room but also from the hundreds of alien species that were watching the broadcast from space. The ripple effect kept going, affecting parts of galactic life that no one had thought of. The changes had only just begun. Part 7. The surprising problems that come with success. 2 years after the crisis, the Galactic Department of Adaptive Systems had a problem that Sarah Chen thought was funny and worrisome at the same time. Humanity's ability to adapt was too good. Dr. Rodriguez warned at a meeting of senior staff, "We're making a new kind of dependency. Check out these requests." He put a list on the wall of the conference room. 347 worlds asking for human consultants to help them with problems they could solve on their own. They aren't trying to learn how we do things, they're just letting us do their thinking for them. Admiral Santos shook his head sadly. "I'm seeing the same thing in the fleet. Alien crews are breaking their own systems on purpose because they think humans will know what to do." Last week, a KRYNN transport lost all of its power in deep space. There was no emergency and no problems. The captain said they wanted to practice improvising like humans when I asked why. They almost froze all of their crew. Sarah rubbed her temples. Now we've gone from being ignored to being praised. Both extremes are bad for you. The issue was more complicated than just relying too much on something. Some species were trying to copy how humans do things without knowing why they do them. The Zentharians, who loved accuracy, made up complicated rules for how to improvise, detailed steps for how to be spontaneous. It was both impressive and completely off the mark. James said, "They've optimized being unoptimized," and he could barely hold back a laugh. There is a manual. A 400-page guide on how to improvise correctly. The introduction is 50 pages long and goes over the ideas behind strategic chaos. It was even worse that the species were trying to force improvisation when it wasn't needed. Before Sarah's team stepped in, 3 people died who could have been saved by Cortex's proven surgical methods. Instead, the company switched to adaptive medicine. Sarah sent them a strong message that said, "Improvisation isn't always the answer. Our methods work best when there isn't much time or money. Use proven methods and the right tools if you have them. Don't throw away millions of years of knowledge just because people made improvisation look cool. The cultural backlash was also getting stronger. The Purity of Heritage movement came about, saying that people were destroying unique alien cultures by pushing for a single solution that worked for everyone. Tenish, a Vrel scholar who spoke for them, made good points that Sarah couldn't completely ignore. Tenish said in a public debate with Sarah that each species developed its own ways of solving problems over millions of years, based on its own biology, psychology, and environmental pressures. The cortex crystalline perfection isn't wrong, it's right for crystalline beings. The fact that Xantharian precision engineering isn't a flaw shows how aware they are of math. Isn't it a kind of cultural imperialism to say that human improvisation is better? Sarah had to admit that the argument was good. You're right that each species has its own way of doing things that is useful. We never meant to say that human methods should take the place of alien ones. We wanted to add improvisation as another tool to the toolbox, not take everything out and fill it with only human tools. Maybe your department should focus on integration instead of innovation, Tenish said. Help species remember their own ways of adapting instead of taking yours. The talk caused a big change in how the department does things. Instead of teaching pure human improvisation, they started helping species remember how they used to solve problems before they became perfect. Veldar led an archaeological dig into old KRYNN records, where they found stories of how their ancestors came up with desperate new ideas during the dying sun crisis. We didn't always think this way, he said with awe as he looked at engineering journals that were thousands of years old. Our ancestors did things that would make modern KRYNN engineers pass out. Experimental drives that fail 40% of the time. Colonies built on worlds that were barely livable, with makeshift life support. They did things that we would never do now. The Xantharians found patterns that were similar. Their ancient mathematicians didn't just look for elegant proofs, they also liked to play with math and explore useless ideas out of pure curiosity. These ideas later became important to their technology. The Vrel found records of discord storms, which were times when their consensus-based society purposely encouraged disagreement to keep things from getting boring. We used to do this, Matriarch Sella said as she read the old texts. Every 100 cycles, we would intentionally break up into groups with different ideas. People thought it was important for mental health. When did we stop? The galaxy became more diverse, not less, as species rediscovered their own ways of adapting. The cortex made flex crystal engineering that kept the geometric accuracy of their work while adding human-like durability. The Xantharians came up with exploratory mathematics, which combined their love of proof with a more human way of thinking about experiments. The Vrel set up regular times for productive discord, which felt natural to their culture in a way that human-style debate never could. But people had their own problems to deal with. Success had brought them money, power, and new duties, as well as the temptation to believe their own press. When a human company called Terrific Solutions was caught selling fake improvised systems to desperate worlds, it caused a scandal. They made technology that was intentionally broken and sold it as authentically improvised, charging high prices for what was basically sabotage. This is exactly what I warned about, Maria said angrily at the emergency meeting. We're not unique because we make things up. We had to improvise. We've lost what made us valuable in the first place the moment we start selling our survival skills as a luxury item. Sarah said yes. We need to keep in mind that we are not the main characters in this story. We are the lucky species because our problems happen to be the same as the galaxies. We are not better than other species because of our luck, and we don't have the right to take advantage of them. The department started Operation Humility, a campaign across the galaxy to change how people see their role. They didn't put humans in the roles of saviors or teachers. Instead, they put humans in the role of fellow learners, sharing methods that worked in this crisis but might not work in the next one. Sarah said in a widely broadcast speech, the next crisis might need cortex precision, Xantharian mathematical genius, or Vrel consensus building. Our job is to make sure that the galaxy doesn't lose any of these skills. Our biggest strength is that we use different methods. The message struck a chord, especially when people openly admitted their mistakes. James gave a talk called 50 Times Human Improvisation Almost Killed Us, in which he talked about disasters that happened because people were too reckless with their experiments. Maria wrote down every ship that was lost because of systems that weren't properly tested. Maria told a group of young alien engineers, "We win often enough that it seems like we always win. But we keep failing. The difference is that we see failure as a normal part of learning. People think it's a disaster when a cortex experiment doesn't work. When a human experiment doesn't work, we say, "Hey, that didn't work," and try something else. Neither approach is right or wrong, they're just different. The ancients, who were not expected to teach us anything useful, may have taught us the most. Keeper Thane came back with a shocking offer. "We want to set up failure archives," Thane said. "Complete records of every failed experiment, wrong theory, and failed attempt from our 3 million-year history. We were ashamed of our flaws, so we hid these records. But we now know that knowing how and why things fail may be more useful than knowing how to succeed." All species could now access the ancient failure archives. The insights were mind-blowing. The ancients tried out technologies that people were just starting to look into millions of years ago. They could see why those efforts didn't work, which saved many lives and resources. "This is the real gift," Sarah said as she and Thane looked through the archives. "Not teaching everyone to think like humans, but making a galactic knowledge commons where every species shares its own point of view, even its mistakes." The galaxy was learning to accept contradictions and value both accuracy and creativity, as well as both stability and chaos, as well as both old wisdom and new ideas. It was a mess, hard to understand, and sometimes annoying. It was also doing its job. The amount of trade kept going up. When species mixed their methods, innovation sped up. The conservative group led by Senator Krath even agreed that the results were impossible to deny, but they were still on guard against losing traditional knowledge. Sarah thought about how far they'd come and how far they still had to go as the second anniversary of the crisis passed. She told her team, "We haven't fixed everything. We just remembered that nothing stays the same. The galaxy is a living system that needs to change all the time. We need to make sure that adaptation stays healthy by being diverse, strong, and open to learning from everyone." James lifted his glass to toast. "To chaos that works. To remembering our mistakes," Maria said. "To staying imperfect," Velvar said. Sarah smiled and added the last part, "To building a galaxy where the unique wisdom of each species, including the wisdom of their mistakes, makes us all stronger." The problems that come with success weren't over. They would never be. But the galaxy was starting to see that as a good thing, not a bad thing. 5 years after the galactic crisis, Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of Nexus Station, a new kind of facility that would have been impossible before. Built cooperatively by 17 species, it incorporated Cortex crystalline architecture, Xantharian mathematical design, human improvised systems, and Vrel organic flow patterns into something that shouldn't work but absolutely did. "It's beautiful chaos," she murmured, watching ships arrive and depart in patterns that still looked random to her but were actually highly coordinated, just coordinated in a new way that no single species could have designed alone. Beside her stood Kira, the young Xantharian who'd been one of the first students in the Applied Improvisation program 5 years ago. She was now a lead engineer on Nexus Station, representing a new generation that had never known the old rigid systems. "Ambassador Chen, you should see the latest proposal from the Mixed Species Engineering team," Kira said excitedly, projecting a holographic design. "It's a self-modifying station that can reconfigure based on traffic patterns, resource availability, and even the emotional states of its inhabitants." Sarah studied the design with mixed feelings. It was brilliant, far beyond what any single species could have conceived. But it also represented something that made her slightly uneasy. "Kira, this is amazing work. But I have to ask, do you understand how to fix it if it breaks?" The young Xantharian's expression shifted to confusion. "Why would we fix it? The station fixes itself. That's the whole point. But if the self-repair systems fail, then the backup systems engage. And if those fail, the tertiary systems activate. We've eliminated single points of failure completely." Sarah sighed. "That's not what I meant. Can you, personally, with your hands and basic tools, repair this station if all the automated systems fail?" Kira's silence was telling. "This is what concerns me," Sarah said gently. "Your generation is brilliant at integration, combining the best of every species' approaches. But are you learning the fundamental skills? Can you improvise if the perfect solution fails?" The question launched a heated debate across the galaxy. The older generation worried that the young were becoming dependent on sophisticated systems they didn't fully understand. The younger generation argued that they were building better systems that didn't need primitive backup plans. "You sound like my human grandfather talking about how young people can't fix cars anymore because everything's computerized," Kira said with a smile. "Every generation thinks the next one is losing essential skills." "Maybe they're right," Sarah countered. "On Earth, we rediscovered that the hard way. We automated everything, then nearly collapsed when solar flares took out our computer networks. The only communities that survived were the ones with people who still knew how to farm without GPS, manufacture without computer-controlled systems, and communicate without networks. The debate intensified when the galaxy faced its first post-crisis challenge, the Cascade Anomaly. It started as a minor scientific curiosity, a region of space where quantum fields behaved unexpectedly. Then ships began disappearing. Not destroyed, not damaged, simply vanishing without trace. Within weeks, a sphere of unstable spacetime had expanded to encompass 3 star systems. The sophisticated predictive models built over the past 5 years all failed to explain the anomaly. Every elegant solution attempted made it worse. The galaxy's new interconnected systems, designed to be resilient against traditional failures, proved vulnerable to this completely unexpected problem. "We need to try something radical," Admiral Santos announced at the Emergency Council. "Something stupid and dangerous that no rational computer system would approve." Dr. Hiro Matsuda, now in his 70s but still working in the field, presented a plan that made even the human representatives wince. "We send a ship directly into the anomaly. No sophisticated sensors, no computer guidance, they'll just be scrambled anyway. Just basic visual observation and one brilliant pilot making instinctive decisions faster than the anomaly can react." "That's insane," Senator Kraft declared. "You're proposing to send someone on a suicide mission based on pure guesswork." "Welcome to humanity," Hiro replied cheerfully. "Sometimes guesswork is all you've got." The pilot they chose was unexpected. Kira volunteered, along with a mixed crew of young engineers from different species, all trained in the old improvisation methods. "I understand what you were trying to teach me," Kira told Sarah before the mission. "Perfect systems make us forget how to be imperfect. If we lose the ability to improvise, we lose our ability to handle the truly unexpected." The mission into the Cascade Anomaly became the most watched event in galactic history. The ship, deliberately primitive by modern standards, entered the unstable region with nothing but basic instruments and crew intuition. The live feed showed Kira and her crew navigating by pure instinct, making split-second decisions that no computer could calculate. When systems failed, they improvised. When instruments gave contradictory readings, they trusted their judgment. When the anomaly did something impossible, they didn't freeze in confusion, they tried something equally impossible in response. 6 hours into the mission, transmission was lost. The galaxy held its breath. 2 days later, the ship emerged, damaged, barely functional, but intact. More importantly, it brought data that finally explained the anomaly. The Cascade wasn't a natural phenomenon, it was an ancient automated defense system, designed to protect something the ancients had hidden millions of years ago. It responded to sophisticated technology as a threat, Kira explained to the breathless council. "Our primitive systems didn't trigger its defenses. By being less advanced, we were able to get close enough to understand it." The revelation was profound. The ancients' hidden installation contained knowledge they deliberately sealed away, technologies so powerful they'd feared their own ability to use them responsibly. Keeper Thane addressed the galaxy with what seemed like profound sadness. "We grew so advanced that we feared ourselves. So we hid our most powerful discoveries, protected by systems designed to activate against sophisticated technology. We assumed that by the time any species could penetrate those defenses, they'd be wise enough to use what they found." But wisdom isn't about technological advancement, Sarah realized. It's about knowing when to use simple solutions instead of complex ones. Your defenses assumed progress would be linear, that more advanced meant better. You never anticipated a galaxy that valued strategic simplicity. The ancient installation was carefully opened, revealing technologies that even after millions of years were beyond current understanding. But unlike the old days, the galaxy approached these discoveries with caution. "We're not ready for this yet," Veldar declared, examining a device that could apparently reshape planetary cores. "Just because we can understand how it works doesn't mean we should use it." It was a new kind of wisdom, choosing not to use available technology. The installation was sealed again, but with a different kind of protection, not automated defenses, but a mixed species council of guardians who would determine if and when the galaxy was ready for each technology. Kira was offered a position as one of the youngest guardians. "How do we decide when we're ready?" she asked Sarah. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But I think the fact that you're asking the question instead of assuming you know the answer is a good start." The Cascade Anomaly incident shifted the galaxy's perspective again. The young generation realized the value of primitive skills and improvisation. The older generation recognized that their youth weren't abandoning fundamentals, they were building on them to create something new. New educational programs emerged, teaching both sophisticated systems design and basic improvisation. Students learned to build perfect mathematical models and to know when to ignore those models and trust their intuition. They studied ancient wisdom and cutting-edge innovation simultaneously, understanding them not as contradictory but as complementary. We're creating a balanced approach, James observed. Using the best tools for each situation, sophisticated when appropriate, simple when necessary, and wise enough to tell the difference. The galaxy's economy continued to evolve. The initial chaos had settled into what complexity theorists called edge of chaos dynamics, not perfectly ordered but not completely random either. Systems were stable enough to be reliable but flexible enough to adapt. New trade routes continued to emerge, not through central planning but through organic growth as traders discovered efficiencies. Resource distribution became more equitable as waste conversion technologies allowed every world to manufacture value from materials previously discarded. But perhaps the most profound change was cultural. The galaxy had developed what humans called a growth mindset, the belief that abilities and systems could be improved through effort and learning rather than being fixed by nature or tradition. We used to believe each species had inherent characteristics that defined them, Velvar reflected. Cortex were precise, Xantharians mathematical, humans chaotic. Now we understand these are starting points, not limitations. A cortex can learn improvisation. A human can develop precision. A Xantharian can embrace creative play. As Sarah prepared to retire from the Department of Adaptive Systems, she looked back on 7 years that had transformed the galaxy. But she knew the transformation wasn't complete, it would never be complete. That was the whole point. We didn't save the galaxy, she said in her farewell address. We reminded it how to save itself. And that's a skill it will need to keep practicing, forever. The next generation was ready to carry that lesson forward. As Kira took over as director, she had one message for the galaxy. Stay curious. Stay humble. Stay adaptable. The moment we think we've figured everything out is the moment we become vulnerable to the next crisis we can't imagine. The galaxy, chaotic and beautiful and imperfect, continued to evolve. 20 years after the Galactic Crisis, Ambassador Sarah Chen, who is now retired and teaches at the Galactic Academy on Earth, stood in front of a class of students from different species. Most of them weren't even born when the crisis happened. Does anyone know what saved the galaxy? She asked. A young person raised their hand with confidence. We did. We used improvisation and recycling to solve the Xerium crisis. Sarah shook her head. Not right. The students in the class seemed confused. A Cortex student tried again and said, the combined efforts of all species working together. Closer, Sarah said, but still not quite right. She pulled up a picture of the galaxy from 20 years ago, when it was neat, optimized, and perfect. Then she showed it as it is now, a complicated web of systems that are all connected, chaotic but working, always changing but stable. She said softly, what saved the galaxy was the galaxy remembering how to save itself. Humanity didn't bring some magical solution. We brought a mirror that showed every species what they had forgotten, that perfection is fragile, that optimization makes things brittle, and that being able to adapt is more important than being able to perfect. She walked around the classroom, pointing to the different students. Every species here had ancestors who faced impossible challenges and found improbable solutions. The Cortex survived their son's death. The Xantharians overcame a planetary disaster that should have destroyed them. The Vrel evolved from solitary beings into a collective consciousness. Each species has a history of radical adaptation. But success made you forget. You became so good at what you did that you didn't need to change. When the crisis hit, you forgot how. The only thing that gave humanity an edge was that we remembered, because we'd never had the chance to forget. A Vrel student thought for a moment and then shimmered. So humanity's job wasn't to find specific solutions, but to remind us that solutions could be found. That's right, Sarah said with a smile. And teaching the galaxy that there are many kinds of intelligence and ways to solve problems, and that having a variety of methods is a strength, not a weakness. The lesson showed how much the galaxy had changed. The crisis started an economic change that affected every part of life. 20 years ago, the rules of the Galactic Trade Network would have seemed crazy. There were hundreds of possible routes between worlds instead of just one that was the best. Some were fast, some were scenic, and some were slow on purpose so that people could meet new people and make unexpected discoveries. It wasn't just about moving goods anymore. Trading was also about making friends and sharing what you know. The chaos markets had become a new way to do business. Chaos markets were different from regular exchanges because they added randomness to the mix. For example, they had surprise shipments, unexpected partnerships, and what economists called productive inefficiency. This meant that they made a little less money on each transaction, but they were much more innovative and resilient. Dr. James Rodriguez, who now teaches thousands of alien students in his economics classes, said, "It sounds counterintuitive. Why would you purposely make your market less efficient? But efficiency is based on known conditions. When conditions change, which they always do, efficiency becomes inefficiency. Instead, chaos markets optimize for adaptability." The political scene had also changed. The Galactic Council had changed from a hierarchy of old, powerful civilizations to a system where different species took turns leading, no matter how old or powerful they were. The time a species led wasn't based on how advanced their technology was, but on their own point of view. "We just finished a term led by the Whisper Collective," Velvar told Sarah during one of their regular calls. He was now mostly retired, but he still had a lot of power. "They're one of the youngest species in the galaxy. They weren't even able to travel through space when the crisis hit. But their leaders came up with ideas that none of us older species had thought of." "What kinds of insights?" Sarah wanted to know. They asked why we needed physical trade routes at all. "They're making quantum entanglement networks for sharing information, not moving things. They hadn't learned it was impossible yet, so they didn't know not to try." The story was part of a bigger pattern. The newest species in the galaxy, inspired by humans, no longer waited to catch up to older civilizations before making their own contributions. They were bringing new ideas because they didn't have the same assumptions that the older species had built up over time. But the change was more than just in politics and economics. It had changed how species saw themselves and each other. The old biases had gone away. No species was thought to be better than the others. People liked the Cortex's accuracy, but they also liked the chaos of humans, the consensus of Vrel, and the beauty of Xantharian math. There was a time and place for each method. Partnerships between different species were now common in all areas. Art galleries displayed collaborations among entities whose sensory perceptions functioned across entirely distinct spectrums. Scientists put together species whose members actually thought in different dimensions. Families formed across species lines, not biological families, but chosen families that were connected by love and a common goal. Keeper Thane told Sarah during a visit to Earth, "We've made something that has never been seen before. The ancients have been watching for 3 million years, and they've never seen such quick cultural integration between different species. Your galaxy is one of a kind." "It's not my galaxy," Sarah said softly. "Now it's equally owned by everyone. That's the whole point." Thane's changing shape looked like it was smiling. "Exactly. And that egalitarian view is a human contribution in and of itself. Before, species were ranked by age and achievement. Humanity taught the galaxy that every point of view is important, no matter what the species' history is." The cultural renaissance that came after humanity's involvement was still surprising. Artists from hundreds of species worked together to make things that no one species could do on its own. A symphony composed for instruments that functioned across 7 sound dimensions. Sculptures that were made of more than one type of matter at the same time. Stories told through a mix of light, smell, math, and feelings that no one species could fully experience on its own, but that together made something bigger than the sum of its parts. The way people learned had changed completely. The old way of learning, which was to learn everything about one species before moving on to others, was replaced with integrated learning from the start. Students learned more than one way to solve problems at the same time, seeing them as different tools instead of competing ideas. Professor Kira, who had become one of the most respected teachers in the galaxy, said, "In the same class, we teach both the Cortex method of crystalline perfection and the human method of productive chaos. Students learn that the question isn't which one is better, but which one is right for the problem at hand." The Galactic Academy on Earth had come to stand for this new way of thinking about education. The campus was designed to mix architectural styles from many different species. For example, elegant Xantharian geometry was next to messy human complexity, and crystalline cortex structures flowed into organic Vrel gardens. "It's not supposed to work," said an architect from the Symmetry Alliance who was visiting and looking at the campus. "Every design rule says this should be a mess of colors." Sarah agreed, "It is visual chaos." And that's what makes it so beautiful. It shows how the galaxy has changed. It's messy, imperfect, and more colorful than any ordered system could ever be. At the end of Sarah's class, a young human student came up to her and asked a question that got to the heart of everything that had changed. Professor Chen, my grandfather talks about Earth before we made contact with other planets. He says that people were different back then, scrappy, independent, and creative. Do you think we've lost that by joining the galaxy? Sarah thought about the question carefully. She had asked herself that question many times. Come with me, she said, taking the student to the observation deck that looked out over the spaceport. They saw ships come and go, including human ships with alien crews, alien ships that had been modified with human designs, and brand new hybrid ships that were the result of collaborative engineering. A Cortex freighter landed with a little bit of uneven grace, and the pilot clearly used human-taught improvisation skills. A human passenger ship left using Xantharian navigation equations that had been improved through Vrel consensus decision-making. Sarah asked, "What do you see?" The student thought for a while. "I see integration. Working together. Different species learning from each other. I see people spreading," Sarah said in a soft voice. "Not through conquest or assimilation, but through sharing. Every ship you see has a piece of human thought in it, our willingness to improvise, to embrace chaos, and to try the impossible. But it's not pure human thought anymore. It's been improved by Cortex precision, Xantharian math, and Vrel collaboration." She turned to look at the student. "We haven't lost our character by joining the galaxy, we've multiplied it. Our ability to adapt, improvise, and turn limitations into strengths is now part of galactic culture. But we've also gained gifts. The Cortex taught us patience, the Xantharians taught us theoretical elegance, and the Vrel taught us how to work together in harmony. So we're still people, but better?" "Yes, we're still human," Sarah said. "But we're more than just human. Every other species is still itself but also more than it was. That's the real change. We're all becoming more by sharing what makes us different." As the sun set over the academy, Sarah saw more ships come in. They were bringing students from all over the galaxy to learn in a place that was once thought to be primitive and backward. Now, Earth was known as the place where the philosophy that saved and changed galactic civilization began. But Sarah knew that the change was far from over. There would be new problems. There would be problems in the galaxy that couldn't be solved with the methods we have now. Species would have to change again and remember that perfection is a trap and that the most important skill for survival is the ability to change. She told the student, "We didn't finish anything. We started something. We taught the galaxy how to change, how to grow, and how to adapt. That process never ends." The student asked, "What's next?" Sarah smiled. "I don't know, and that's fine. A message to the future, the end." The Central Galactic Archives had a new section called the Crisis Chronicles. It was full of carefully preserved records of species histories and achievements. It told the whole story of the galactic crisis, how humans got involved, and what happened next. But the last entry wasn't a record of what happened in the past. Sarah Chen, Velvar, Keeper Thane, Maria Santos, and representatives from dozens of species all recorded a message. It was meant for the future, for any species or generation that would have to deal with the next crisis that current knowledge couldn't fix. Sarah was the first to speak. "If you're reading this, your galaxy is probably in trouble. Something has gone wrong that your perfect systems can't fix. Your optimized solutions aren't working. Your established methods have failed." "Good," Velvar said. "That means you're facing a real challenge that will make you stronger. Don't give up hope. Don't think the problem is impossible. Think back to times when your species was in trouble and your ancestors had nothing but their wits and willpower. Remember how they got through tough times," Keeper Thane said. Then Maria spoke, "Do something dumb. Do something that goes against everything you've been taught. Be ready to fail spectacularly, because spectacular failures teach you more than safe successes." Then, from species all over the galaxy, dozens of other voices joined in, each adding their own wisdom. Value the outsider's point of view, those who don't know what's impossible. Accept productive chaos. Trying to impose order doesn't work, order comes from disorder. Keep in mind that every species is important, no matter how old or advanced it is. Don't just look for the best answer, sometimes good enough is better than perfect. Keep your ability to improvise, even when you don't need to. Stay humble. When you succeed, you forget how to fail, and that's how you learn. The message ended with Sarah's voice one more time. The galaxy you live in was saved not by finding the perfect answer, but by remembering how to search for imperfect ones. We didn't solve all problems, we just remembered how to keep solving them. Now it's your turn. What will you remember? What will you preserve? What will you have the courage to try when everything else has failed? Be curious, be humble, and be flexible. The universe doesn't reward perfection, it rewards resilience. Good luck. And remember, if a bunch of chaotic, primitive humans could help save the galaxy, you can handle whatever comes next. The message played in the archives, waiting for the inevitable day when it would be needed. Even though the current crisis had been solved and the galaxy had changed, the universe was still infinite and problems would always be there. But now the galaxy remembered something it had forgotten, that every ending was also a beginning, that every solution opened up new possibilities, and that the ability to change was the most valuable thing in the universe. Humanity's legacy wasn't the specific technologies or methods they'd introduced. It was a reminder that intelligence can take many forms, that wisdom is knowing when to use which approach, and that the greatest strength is being able to keep learning, changing, and trying new things when old things stop working. The galaxy had become a place where chaos and order coexisted, where ancient wisdom and youthful enthusiasm collaborated, where perfection was recognized as beautiful but resilience was recognized as essential. And somewhere on a small blue planet, new generations of humans were growing up knowing they'd once helped save the stars, not by being special, but by being exactly who they were, imperfect, chaotic, creative beings who'd never forgotten how to make something from nothing. The story didn't end. It changed, like all good stories do. The galaxy kept spinning, kept changing, kept growing, messier, more complex, more beautiful than ever before. That was, without a doubt, the best new idea of all.